Welcome back to CapTech Trends. Really excited about today's episode. At Apple's WWDC, they announced Passkeys, and I was right away excited to talk about it and to learn more. Today I've got two guests. Andrew Levy is a senior consultant out of our DC office, and Mark Badger, a fellow at CapTech, and also a creative director for our CX practice. Andrew, Mark, welcome.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So, Passkeys may be a new concept for a lot of people, or maybe they've heard of it because they watched the conference. And like any new technology, there's lots of different ways to look at it or think about it. So from both a technology perspective and a creative design perspective, I'd like to hear how you guys think of Passkeys. And we'll get more into more detail about how they can be implemented and some of the details. But from a high-level definition, kind of educate me on what Passkeys are. And we'll go with you first, Andrew.
Sure. So Passkeys are a frictionless and secure alternative to passwords that have been standardized by large companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft to provide a consistent login experience for users across different platforms and devices. And at a high level, it's the first big step towards a passwordless future.
Great. And I'm glad you said frictionless. If you've been listening to the previous podcast, specifically the ones on virtual and augmented reality, both of which I enjoy and have multiple headsets for, there's so much friction to having to put something on your head, clear out space around you. And where CapTech sees a lot of these trends going is to have more and more technology involved in our lives and throughout our daily tasks, but realizing it less, seeing it less, feeling it less. It just becomes more natural. So steps are removed. So augmented and virtual reality add steps to add immersion. Yep. But this is a technology that reduces friction and reduces steps. And I think that's one of the things that gets me excited about it. And it's a perfect lead-in, Mark, for you to talk about the user experience.
Yeah, it's something I think, maybe we'll talk in a little bit in terms of implementation, how it actually plays out. I think the idea of friction and frictionless is interesting when it comes to issues around convenience and security. So I'm sure we'll get into some of those topics. But I think the shortest way to talk about Passkeys is, like Andrew said, it's meant to obviate the need for passwords altogether. There's a lot of challenges with security when it comes to passwords. We know how users, people, how they deal with passwords. They will repeat them all the time across sites. I myself do it. They will write them down sometimes. They will, use easy to remember words just because you have so many things you want to be able to log into and authenticate. And all the security provisions that various companies have done in various industries to try and make things secure often contribute to the problem. So things like automatic sign-outs after a certain delay, just ways that it makes it hard for people to maintain that security while also maintaining the convenience. So then there's all these other structures, right? The idea, like third-party password managers. Google and Apple have their own frameworks, which we'll probably talk about a bit too, because they do intersect with Passkeys. And as Andrew said, Passkeys are intended to basically be the next gen altogether. Like some of that framework we will still need for the foreseeable future, for years probably. But the vision for it, and when it works, it does work really well like this. You don't need a password, and it's easy, and it's as easy as unlocking your phone. And I want to talk about that a little bit later in terms of the customer experience as well, because there's some downsides to that actually. When you talk about awareness of what's going on, and you talk about the friction you have with technology, sometimes that friction is good because you want to be reminded of what's going on. You don't have to understand what's actually happening underneath the hood, but you want to be reminded, for example, actually, one nice thing about 2FA and MFA, so that's two-factor authentication, which is just a subset of multi-factor authentication, is you are very much reminded I am going through a secure experience because I'm being prompted to provide other ways of validating who I am. When you unlock with just your thumbprint, it's easy to forget.
It's a good point, and you hit on a couple of things in there on the multi-factor authentication, passphrases, right? So, I know it seems silly, but as you get older and you need readers and you're on an airplane and your readers aren't available and you try to type in 37 characters on the keyboard and you can't see, you're going to make a mistake. It's going to become frustrating. That's a high friction experience. Yeah. I use 1Password as a password manager, and I know I've got well over 100 passwords in there, which is crazy to think about. And then it alerts you when you're using the same passwords in multiple areas. So now I've got 100 different things in there.
Right.
It alerts you when sites have been compromised and you need to go change your password, which happens more often than you would think, right? So we're at a point in time where we have a technology with really no downside other than implementation details, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But it is more secure, not less secure. Has far less friction, right? I mean, and improves the user experience. There's no downside academically to this.
It's a very rare technology that when something does something like that, it improves UX and adds security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Andrew mentioned also, it's one of those things that I think we as consumers and as technology implementers, right, in the work that we do, the more we can have these foundational technologies where the largest companies in the world agree on a standard, it makes everything so much easier, right? So I'm sure, y'all have done things with smart homes and trying to figure out how to get HomeKit to work with Google's version of that. It's a nightmare. So the upcoming, I think, is it Matter? I'm trying to remember now because they've had a couple different standards. There's Thread and Matter.
Right.
But these standards where we can all all our devices will talk to each other on a shared understanding. It makes our lives easier. This is the same idea, right? There's just so many ways right now that we're trying to keep our lives secure, and the frictionless, passwordless future is definitely ideal. And
Death of the password is a big, big deal.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we, how much you want to go into it, but some of the details about how authentication works. There's three basic principles. So there's the something you know, something you have, and something you are. So something you are is like biometrics are common. Something you have could be something like your device, or even in a way like a third-party app.
An authentication app giving you a code.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. And then something you know is like your password or passphrase, or the old-fashioned security questions about, they're really hard to find out. Mother's maiden name, that is really hard to dig up, your birthday, all these things that nobody ever knows, right?
And people on Facebook will tell the world who your childhood best friend was.
Right, exactly. Or where we went to primary school, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things about Passkeys is the part of the relying on something which is kind of the most fragile part of password security, disappears because it's not based on something you know. And Andrew can talk, I'm sure, more about like all the details about how that works because it's definitely out of my wheelhouse. But that's an interesting part of it.
Well, something you have and something you are become one thing because you have the phone that's biometrically identifying you.
Yeah. Well, the part about the secure layer of it is this is one of those I think, again, there's some trade-offs, but in terms of the ease of use from a customer experience perspective, all the complexity is taken care of behind the scenes. It's just your thumbprint or your face kind of thing. So yes, it is.
It feels like one step.
It feels like one step, exactly. But the behind the scenes stuff is, this is like secure authentication that goes beyond, again, what I can talk about with any kind of confidence.
So let me go back into the defining part of it.
Sure.
You guys did a good job of defining it, but I want people to get a visual, image in their brain of what this looks like and behaves like.
Yeah.
So let's say I already have a passkey set up. We'll get into how it gets set up. So I go to my phone. So let's say go into my banking app, and it just does a Face ID, and I'm in.
Yeah, it depends on the platform. It's implemented a little bit differently based on Android, iOS, and web. So I'll take iOS for example. When you get into an app, you're presented with a login screen usually. If you click on the username field and focus on it, it will auto-suggest any passkeys that you have for that given app and associated with that username. And as soon as you click that you want to use that passkey, your biometrics modal will pop up, just like you're used to, like signing into your iPhone, and you're automatically logged in.
And on the Mac, it would be your fingerprint on the keyboard.
Correct.
If you have that, yeah.
If you have that.
Android, that's a big thing. Passkeys are only supported for those devices that support biometric support as well.
Well, you have the QR code potential as well.
There's some workarounds. QR code's one of them. Your PIN can be that. But yeah, when you're navigating passkeys on desktop and web experiences in particular, or I guess it might be apps as well. Yep. But you need that workaround potentially if you don't have the biometric authentication available.
Right. So I'm going to give 3 examples. One, I pick up my iPhone, I launch the app, and I just touch the ID field, and it suggests my passkey, and I say, I want to use my passkey, Face ID in.
Right.
Yeah.
Same flow for my desktop Mac with my fingerprint on the keyboard.
Yes.
Now I'm visiting my parents who have a PC. Hypothetically, I made them get rid of PCs a long time ago. Not supporting you anymore. Out of service. But hypothetically, I'm on their PC, or you know what? I've got a gaming PC that I use for VR, so I'm on that, and I want to log into something that has an Apple Passkey. What happens then?
So then on the web experience, you can choose the option to share a passkey or use it on a different device. So it'll pop up a QR code, and then you take out your device that has the passkey installed on it, and then you use your camera app to scan the QR code. Boom, you're in.
So my PC would have to have a camera.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It also, I think it has to have Bluetooth enabled as well.
So it doesn't need to have a camera. You scan the phone camera on the QR code.
Right. Okay. Good. And then
biometrics pops up on your phone and it communicates to the.
Gotcha. And using Bluetooth Low Energy.
Correct.
I think the Bluetooth layer is there to validate proximity, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that makes total sense. So these are implementation details.
Yes.
But what's important here, this is where things explode, right? Because you could say, wow, it's biometric, and even when it's not biometric, I'm just pointing my phone at a QR code. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Now you get into edge cases where Bluetooth is disabled on a device or not available on a device, and now we have to handle that from a user experience perspective, and it gets more complicated.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I've been trying to imagine what the true future, like 5 years out, 10 years out, I don't know.
When passwords are gone.
When passwords are gone and when it's all about the passkeys, like what that really looks like. Because we've been living with passwords since the dawn of computers, pretty much, right? Since we had authenticated things, even if it was just a password and wasn't a username at the time, right? So
we had passwords before computers.
You're right.
Right. To get into a speakeasy, we had to have a password.
I'm sure y'all have done this too. Like when you dig into like the history of authentication and you talk about keys as a concept, of course, you have keys and locks, right? Which are like at a philosophical level are no different than a public and private key kind of exchange that we have going on. So if you've used a key to enter your house, which most of us do, right? Like that is at some very basic level.
We're so used to the abstraction, we forgot the origin.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. It's not this velvet rope club.
Right.
So the in between now and that 5 to 10 year future, what we've been talking a lot internally is like, what are the best practices around mitigating the messiness of it? Especially, I guess in particular around the user experience of it, because that's really where it's going to play out. So last night I went through and for those that are curious, I can't remember the URL right now, but 1Password actually maintains a directory of currently available passkey experiences that you can use online.
I didn't know that. I'm gonna look that up.
So I can tell you, because I tried all the ones for which I had an account, eBay, Kayak, Shop, Best Buy. Those are the ones, I think I tried another one or two, but I tried them all and they were all different. Like the passkey layer, once you get there, is the same.
Yes.
The getting there is different, not intuitive. Sometimes I had to dig for it, which shocked me because actually if you're looking for a good intro to passkeys and kind of what the prospect is, New York Times did an article back in January about the RIP password, here come passkeys kind of thing. You can look it up and it tells you a lot of this stuff in very, accessible
terms. What was the
terms.
publication again?
New York Times.
Okay.
Yeah. And which is actually how I found the directory in the first place, actually. But I had to, with Best Buy, I had to dig to actually, I was expecting actually, because they've been noted as one of the retailers that just was kind of first to market for this, and that's something we should probably talk about too. Like, what are the brand advantages to embracing passkeys now as opposed to waiting? And so I was expecting like a really best-in-class implementation, and I have to say, like, it was rougher than I thought. It didn't prompt me immediately to, do you want to create a passkey? Once I created one, it still actually, like, I think I actually was only on the app finally able to ever use a passkey. It still wanted me to use my 2FA, which I had set up previously. So
it brings up a good question.
Yeah.
I'm company X, and I want to implement passkeys. Do I need to? What's my responsibility for educating my customers on what a passkey is? Do I assume that people who want to use them know what they are? Do I obfuscate it entirely, not even call it a passkey, and make it this is a fast pass secure? How are we going to how do companies meet their customers with this technology in a way that we don't have to over-educate or over-explain?
So I'll go backwards on that. So I don't see an advantage to trying to create your own kind of cute marketing term around what this is. Call it a passkey. It's meant to be a generic word like password. It's not meant to be passkey TM trademark. It's meant to be a common way that we will refer to this in going forward, period.
Okay.
So the best thing you can do from a brand perspective is to lean into that, because you're going to then leverage everybody else's adoption of this passkey concept. And so you're not going to have to work upstream to like create your own quick pass, one time only, whatever it is kind of thing. I don't know what you would call it. So from a branding perspective and the effort you would need to lift to educate your customers, go ahead and like use everything that's available, including calling it passkey. So that, start with that. But I think for the foreseeable future, we would recommend that brands do some amount of, certainly a lot of edge case testing to look at all the flows that would likely come from this, including, does the user already have 2FA set up? Does the user already have some other form of multi-factor authentication set up? What does it look like to them once they've enabled a passkey? You should basically, opt them out of these other ones so that they can have this more frictionless experience.
There's going to be a sunsetting.
And it will take some time. But,
yeah.
But to your question about educating the customer, I don't think they have to do the heavy lifting about, certainly all the technology behind it. But I think there's some education that a brand will want to do, and I think it will be to their benefit to do it. We haven't really talked about this yet, but in the discussing why a brand would want to do this now, when it feels and in reality is like, it's not bleeding edge, it's not cutting edge, but it is your early
first step.
Yeah, it's
early adopter.
Early adopter type stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of fumbling, and this vision though feels very real. It hasn't. Nothing that's come before has really had the promise that this does, and when it actually works, it feels like it lives up to it. It truly does. So if you're a brand where security is really crucial to, for most brands it is, right? But when you're talking about things like financial services, healthcare, where you've got, PII and PHI and other things that users find, whether by regulation or just by desire, to be really private information, I think it's to your benefit to go into security now, right? To like push for this. And then I think you do have some responsibility, some education, but I think you can do it in a way that's got a marketing edge to it. So no, it's not creating a cute term, but it is leaning into, we are here for you in terms of protecting your information.
Well, there's a nuance there that I think I want to call out. A, it is more secure.
Yes.
Right. So a CISO in an organization would want to do this because it's less complex and more secure.
Yeah.
But then from a marketing branding perspective, being thought of as a security conscious organization, like Apple is, quite frankly,
right?
Famously not even sharing phone data with the FBI when it could solve a crime, right? There's just nothing they're going to do that.
Yeah.
I think that helps the marketing and brand. Andrew, I want to switch to you because you've been involved internally in creating a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Right. And there's going to be a link to the blog you're going to write after this in the description of this podcast. If anybody wants to see, I don't know if it's going to be images or a short movie or
we could probably have like a screen recording of
We'll walk you through that, maybe a voiceover or something so you could see it. But tell us what that was like to create a demo. And here's what I'm thinking. If I'm an organization and I've got 47 different assets, whether it's mobile sites or websites or whatever else, maybe it's 20, I don't know, maybe it's 100. What does it look like to roll this out across not one asset, but all these assets?
Yeah. So we wanted to start with a real life scenario. So a real client scenario where we started with a normal traditional password login experience, and then add on passkeys to see if what that level of effort would be.
So this is right, and that surprised me because I thought the demo was going to be, hey, here's passkeys working as passkeys.
Right.
And what I saw was, here's an organization that's been using passwords and MFA for years, and now they're adopting passkeys.
Right.
Which I think was the right way to do it. I just wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, because we assume that most people who are going to implement passkeys, they're not going to be a greenfield project. It's going to be an add-on. Right. So we wanted to see what the level of effort was for that. So we started with the traditional login flow. And we incrementally added on different features like autofill for when you focus on the username field, you get suggested your passkeys on that device. We ran into a lot of issues with documentation, considering how new this is. So we got about halfway through and we realized that the API for Android doesn't even exist yet. So that came out about 3 weeks or 2 weeks ago. So
it's available now.
It's available now. Yes. So, but at the time, it did not. But iOS, I mean, there's documentation out there, and the same for web. But there are no real like concrete examples that we can work off of. So we were kind of
there is now.
There is now. So we were kind of making it up as we went along.
Right, and it's ours, and you can find it in the blog.
Exactly.
That's not written yet.
Yeah.
Probably.
So it was definitely a good learning experience. And the result that we came up with is it's pretty easy to add on. It's a nice add-on to an existing app. It integrates well with existing login flows, which is nice. There's really not much rework that you need to do of your current, even if you have a third-party authenticator. It can just be added on, and you have passkeys.
Right. So, and it's backward compatible with FIDO2, WebAuthn.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, what's interesting here is it seems like it's not a super heavy lift. Would you correct? Okay. So, not a super heavy lift, but if you have a bunch of assets, are you repeating this process from a code perspective across all of those assets, or does it sit behind that they can all kind of share some common implementation?
So there is rework. We can leverage technologies like React Native, for example, that can output to iOS, Android, and the web. There's something in the works right now. We're going to experiment with that a little bit. But as of right now, for each platform, we're kind of implementing it from scratch.
Great. So if we did something in React Native then and put that in a repository somewhere that everyone on the implementation teams could just pull that down.
Yeah, it could be like a reusable module that you just pull down. And it's not specific to React Native. It could be another multi-platform app.
Sure. Gotcha. And then 2 questions related to that. One, what would have to be true for this not to be easy? Like, right? Do you have something that's a 20-year-old legacy system that's not compliant with WebAuthn? Give me a situation where this is harder.
One thing we discussed was device support. So if you are still supporting iOS 11 and an iPhone 4, you're probably not going to be able to add it as easily. You can add it for devices that are running iOS 16 and up, but who are they going to get the benefit of that? So there are some restrictions on device support. Do you know any other things that would make this hard to implement?
On the back end or the front end?
On the front end.
I think the front end, it's all about technology adoption and how fast people upgrade.
Yeah,
which honestly is faster on iOS than Android.
Historically,
yes.
yeah, for
historically.
sure.
Yeah. Well, when it's forced more, it's pushed more, right? So it's a focus. I've had a thought, and I don't know if this is true, and I want to whiteboard it out at some point. But a lot of the companies I work with and do high level IT strategy type work, getting down to single sign-on or a single entry point into all the services that a company offers is a big deal, because a lot of these companies grow through acquisition, and they're doing a lot of work in the background to try to make it seem like it's 1Password. Seems to me that this could be almost a workaround to that, where if all I have to do is look at my phone and it re-authenticates me for the next thing, it's so frictionless. Like if that was a different passphrase for everything I had to type in, that would be unacceptable, and you'd want to push towards single sign-on. But if all I have to do is look at my phone and I'm already looking at my phone, that doesn't feel like something I necessarily have as much reason to solve for.
I'd love your thoughts on this, Andrew, because I've been focusing mostly on the impacts to users and how it plays out. But I was wondering kind of similar things, like recently, in addition to the third-party tools like Auth or Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, in the past 5 years, Facebook has their centralized login, Apple, Microsoft, all have invested in this. And as far as I can tell, and this is where I rely on you guys who are much more conversant in technology than I am in terms of the underpinnings, it seems like from a security perspective, having a trusted third party like that isn't necessarily all that different I mean, it's different for the user, right? And so that's part of what I would want to talk with brands about is managing, okay, all of a sudden you could have a login experience that has password, username, password, sign in with Apple, sign in with Microsoft, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, sign in with Passkeys, right? Like it becomes insane, right? But on the back end, when you're talking about these trusted security providers, is it that different? And I think it gets to your point, Vinny. If I'm an enterprise thinking about this, why would I choose Passkeys over a Microsoft or an Apple-based solution?
Yeah, so at first glance, when you see Passkeys, you might think that it's a third-party authenticator killer, but it's actually not. So there's one problem that Passkeys doesn't solve currently, which is if you create a passkey on your iOS device and you try to log into that you try to do the QR code thing that we discussed earlier on Google Chrome on your laptop, that won't necessarily work because there are different cloud storage providers. So you have your Google Cloud and your iCloud, and those don't communicate with each other. So that's a huge gap right now, but something is in the works with third-party authenticators like OnePass or Microsoft Authenticator to kind of bridge that gap and act as a middleman so that you can store them in their cloud providers, cloud storage, and share them across different platforms.
So it's going to be a passkey broker.
I believe so, yeah. And I think OnePass is leading the charge on this. I saw something the other day for a few others as well.
You know, one of the things we haven't talked about actually is, you just alluded to that, if you're inside an ecosystem, it really is painless. And I mean, Apple has been doing this for a long time. And in a way, I don't know if they had this vision in the future, but some of the behaviors that they've been doing through either software or hardware have really trained us to be ready for passkeys. So having biometrics widely available, right, on keyboards and our mobile devices, but also the iCloud shared keychain, passkey just leans right into that.
It just fits right in.
Yeah, and this was one of the things that is really, really nice about it once it's set up is, so you create your passkey on your laptop and it's just there on your phone. As long as you're logged in and you have an Apple ID account and you're logged in, right, that gets shared pretty much, it feels automatic. Like I didn't have to wait. And I was able to use that passkey right away. And I feel like that worked even better than it has with passwords. I've had things where I'll reset a password and
it doesn't update.
And it still has my old password on my other device. I'm like, why? This makes no sense. So I think the other thing we haven't talked about that's really an enabling technology is this cloud storage, which, again, we've been getting trained as users to rely on people like Apple or companies like Apple and Google to, share all my stuff across all my stuff, make it easy for me. The advantage is now you add that layer of security and everybody's ready for it.
So I have a naive question for you.
Sure.
I wish I knew the answer to this and didn't have to ask it on a podcast. If I'm a company, I'm implementing passkeys, do I have to choose whether I'm working with Apple only, Microsoft only, or Google only? Or because I'm using passkeys, can my customers use whatever passkey storage they want to use?
Right. As a company, you don't need to have that responsibility of choosing. That's on the user, depending on what their device is, which is actually nice because it gives them the freedom to use whatever device, and it will just work that way. If you do eventually incorporate this with a password manager or a third-party authenticator, then that would bridge the gap, like we were talking about earlier, between platforms.
Right. So one thing then, and it relates to that, and we've chatted about this, but before the podcast. One of the only downsides I can see then in this is you need to trust not one of these companies, but you need to trust all companies.
All of them,
Right. So it's like, do you feel good that Apple and Google and Microsoft have this information? Now, make me feel better about that. It's super encrypted. They can't do anything with it. Like, what are the details? It's not open text things they can look at and copy and reuse.
Right. Yeah. The thing that we're trusting these companies with is this private key. So when you create a passkey, you create a public key, private key pair. We don't have to get too technical, but the private key is stored on the device, and that's what we're entrusting Apple and Google with. It's not like a readable thing. It's not like a password or anything. So, but if it does get compromised, then all your passkeys are compromised. So, a lot of people currently use these password managers heavily. Like I know I use it on my iPhone for all my passwords. So whenever you store a password with these password managers, you're already entrusting them with less secure data.
So it's right. Okay. So it's a moot point. Well, it's funny because you read you read publications and it's like, that's one of the risks. It's like, well, okay, but if you've ever said yes to remember this ID on an app or a web interface, then you're already doing this, and you're already doing it in a less secure manner.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, as you're saying, we're trusting companies with access to our private data or access credentials anyway, a lot. The difference going forward, though, is the brute force hacking or social engineering backed hacking, where you see these data breaches, huge batches of passwords and usernames have been leaked out. One of the things that the Passkeys does,
that goes away. It
goes completely away, right?
Yeah.
So from that kind of attack vector, it's really eliminated as an issue, because a hacker can't actually make use of all those passkeys.
It might be advantageous if I explain that a little bit of how traditional passwords work. So when you log into an app using a username and password, we're sending that data, the username and password that they input into those fields, across the wire, sending it to our backend service, storing it somehow.
Across the wire, it's encrypted
in some way. So even though it's encrypted, once it gets to our backend service, we're still having to store that so that on subsequent logins, we're comparing the password every time. So with Passkeys, all of that goes away because we're not sending any personal information or sensitive information. We're sending a signed signature from the private key on the device. So it's like an imprint of the private key that says, I was the private key that signed this, and we can verify that because I used my biometrics. Right. Then once that signature gets over to the back end, we use the public key to kind of unlock that message. And if the public key, that replaces the password that can be breached. If the public key gets out, nothing happens. Right. There's nothing that can be compromised.
Right, because you'd have to have all the private keys that are on all the local devices.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So that kind of thing that happens now where, we all probably experience this at some point where you hear about one of the services that you use has a data breach and nothing happens, right? But then you have a security issue that shows up on some other place that you have an authenticated relationship. What's probably happened, right, is that dump has gone to some farm of hackers or automated systems that are just trying all those username and passwords against any number of sites, hoping for a hit.
Right.
But once you have the computational power cheaply available to just do these kind of brute force strategies, why not, right? You'll get a hit every now and then. Yep. You can't do it with passkeys.
Right.
So.
Right. So when you talk about phishing, that goes away.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Right, gone.
Yeah.
Right, malware, that can't work that way. I mean, so a lot of to use your phrase, there's several attack vectors that go away.
Yeah, I think the other thing we haven't talked about. So we talked a little bit, about the consumer or customer advantages, a little about the brand advantages, both from a PR and actual, obviously, security perspective. The other thing we don't talk a lot about or we haven't talked about yet, is kind of the operational costs involved with the current authentication scheme. How many calls are made to call centers for password resets? I forgot my so that won't go away, especially in the interim. So we shouldn't be naive about that either, right?
But once passwords go away, that goes away.
Yeah, because actually the call center can't do anything about that.
There will be a new set of problems that will have our own frequently asked questions documents that we'll have to go through. But the old set of problems will go away.
Yeah,
and I think the new problems will be less costly.
I agree. Yeah,
because there'll be less humans involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah, and that's the long pole in that tent. Okay, before we wrapped up, I wanted to get into what are the first steps someone should do, a client should do. So you're motivated, smart developer or creative CX person in an organization. What are the first couple things you do to dig deeper into this within your organization, either to learn about it or get adoption or get excitement?
Do you want to start with this one?
Yeah. So, just a plug, as you mentioned, we'll have at least 1 or 2 blog posts after this that will lay this out in detail.
So more to come. More to come.
Right. So there'll be some things there. I mentioned the Times article from January. That's a decent place. FidoAlliance.org has all of this stuff in detail, probably more detail than you want, but they have some videos and demos that when you're looking to understand the concept and the underpinning, especially if you're on the implementation side, whether that's the design or the technology side, it's a great place to go. Apple does have some great stuff as well. So in terms of base understanding, those are the ones I would initially recommend. They were actually much easier to consume than I thought, especially Fido Alliance. They make it easy.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to be putting out a technical and a non-technical blog. So if you're interested in the public key cryptography stuff, the technical one's for you, just to learn a little bit more about how this is actually working under the hood.
Yeah, I would say also, there's a couple articles, 2 or 3 articles from Forrester in the last year that have talked about this. Some directly in terms of literally about FIDO authentication and passkeys. Others just about kind of the trends around consumer authentication. But I would note actually, like one of the things they pointed in there. This was a year ago, but they did research around customer behavior, and they found that it said 38 of adult U.S. smartphone users have no intention of changing their behavior around authentication.
30%.
38%. So not a majority, but certainly a notable plurality of people that like have no intention of changing their behavior. So we haven't talked about this. This probably isn't a groundswell type thing, right? It's going to have to come from companies adopting this and then pushing, just like they did with 2FA and MFA.
I would argue of that 38% that are planning to do nothing, 99.5% of them don't know what a passkey is.
Yeah. No.
Oh, you're right.
Right. So it's sort of like So it's sort of like saying before the iPhone came out, how many people intend to use their phone as a movie studio? Right. 0%.
Yeah. Right. That's fair.
Right. So I think some of this goes back to that education I was saying and get people excited about it.
Yeah.
Internal to an organization, I'm trying to decide where I would go. Do I go to IT because it's a technical problem? Do I go to the CISO because it's a security problem? Do I go to the head of marketing and brand because that's what it is? Who is it? Talking to all of them? Where do I go to be the, oh my gosh, guys, you got to come see this. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into the consulting. It depends.
Right. Right. So you're going to strike that. So you can't say it depends.
But having not said that, if your company's budgets, so if your customer experience is kind of centralized, whether that's through the CMO or a chief experience officer, that's likely the place to start. Because I'm imagining in that scenario, your company's set up in a structure, however it's meant, structured for software delivery lifecycle, the budgets are probably managed for across the customer experience. And this is really, yes, a security play, but it's hand in glove. It's a customer experience play. The brand play is also there, right? So enhancing the posture and positioning of the company as security focused, as privacy focused. So I think if your company is leading from an experience perspective, that's where you start. I think it's an attractive conversation. You watch a couple of these demos and you try it out, and when it works well, it's amazing. It's it feels magical.
Yeah, right.
It's one of those technologies that actually, when it works well, feels great.
Yeah, there was a comedy bit one time about someone getting on an airplane when Wi-Fi on the airplane was first available, like early on, and the flight attendant said, "Sorry, Wi-Fi is not available," and guys like, "Oh, this is unreal," getting mad. I don't want to, obviously repeat the words, but and it was how quickly do you become so self-entitled to have a technology that just came out? Yeah. But that's me, because when I now have to log into my corporate systems, I have to type a passphrase in, and then a box comes up, and I got to put my finger on the keyboard, and then another box comes up that I got to take my phone out of my pocket, launch an authentication app, and then take that number and type that number into a browser. I am getting angrier and angrier every time I have to do that. I'm like, this problem is now solved, and it's just a matter of being patient enough until it's implemented across all the devices and services that we want to use.
Yeah.
Great. Is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on before we wrap?
I think one of the other angles that kind of supports what we were talking about before from a customer perspective, and also the brand responsibility for the user experience, is I was looking at does this fall into kind of the technology adoption curve that everybody knows about, or some other kind of change behavior curve? And the one that I actually that I liked a lot, which it doesn't help with passkeys, is just kind of in general when you're asking people to make changes to how they do life, kind of thing, right? BJ Fogg has a good model for this, and he talks about motivation versus ability, which is basically ease of use, and then triggers. So, and there's a great chart for this, and once you're on kind of the upper right corner of this chart, change is likely to happen. When you're below this curve, change won't happen. So motivation matters quite a bit. Like, am I motivated to make this change? And so, when you look at the research around authentication and user behavior and adoption, people that have been hacked are highly motivated to secure their stuff. It makes sense. But it also falls along industry lines. People don't care as much about certain relationships, like maybe their local retailer, even if there's logged-in experience. as they do with their banks, right? Like I absolutely want 2FA, MFA, whatever, Passkeys with my bank relationship. But ease of use is a critical factor in that because we're all like inherently lazy. We want easy ways out, right? So even if the motivation is high, if you make this an onerous experience, and again, it's going to be some stuff that the company will have to take responsibility for the next few years to make this transition to Passkeys, make it easy to use, and then you'll get the change that you want out of the user's behavior. But if you don't make it easy, actually it's kind of like, Apple Pay, right? Or Samsung Pay, Google Pay, all of these kinds of these touchless payment schemes. They're super easy, but if they're not made easy during the process, so like if I have to wonder at any given
every time I use Apple Pay, I'm studying the interface to say, will this device support it?
This is the thing, right? So you walk into your local grocery store, and if it says on there, you see the Apple logo, you see the Google logo, you see something like great. That's referred to in his framework as a trigger. So I know at that point, oh, this is great. I'm just going to tap my phone or my watch, whatever, I'm done. But the moment like none of that is there, I'm like, can I use like all of a sudden what used to be actually, and we talked about this with the touchless adoption in the first place, how hard is it really to use a credit card? It's not that hard.
Well, this goes back to the frictionless trend we're seeing, and it goes back to me being increasingly irritated with passphrases. I'm now, and these are long running problems. Passwords have been a problem forever, right? Another thing that's been a problem forever, and maybe just for people like me who are hyper urgent, if I'm at a restaurant and a check is dropped off, I'm ready. I got my credit card. Don't walk away. But they walk away, and now you're sitting there for another 4 or 5 minutes while they have a very busy job to do, to then come back and take it, and then they walk away again, right? And so the ending of the meal is artificially lengthened by a lot. So now if I get a bill that has a QR code on it, and I can just use my phone and Apple Pay, I'm choosing those restaurants over ones that make me sit and wait. Because just like you said, and I choose locations where I can use Apple Pay instead of, and it seems like a minor thing, but it adds up.
It does. It also plays into another kind of experience concept. It's like peak and end theory. So the experiences that you have, and digital are no different, the ones that you remember are kind of the highs and the lows, the highest point and the lowest point, obviously, of something that's really horrible or something that was really great, but also, importantly, the end. So that last interaction you have as part of a chain of interactions in this, whatever you're doing with a company, brand, or restaurant.
You remember it more.
You remember it more. So
it's beginning and ends. And you
want to end well.
Right. You can test this with a friend. If you give someone a string of numbers, 14, 21, 8, 9, 12, 32, 10, what was the first one? 14. What was the last one? 10.
32 and 10.
Right. What are the ones in the middle? No idea. Right. So you can list 10 numbers out fast, and most people will get the end. A lot of people will get the first, and almost no one's going to get the stuff in the middle. Right. Just the way our brains work.
So the main thing I just wanted to reinforce is that I think there's a real advantage to brands, especially those for whom a security and privacy posture plays strongly into their brand and their brand messaging and how they convey trust to their customers. And they need to kind of take on, to an earlier point you made, a little bit of the lift of educating what is a passkey, and then taking the time to make sure that transitional experience where we have to, from a security posture and because of technology not being evenly distributed in terms of available to use passkeys, is going to be a little bit of messiness. And the companies that make it easy, I think, are going to benefit. But it will take some effort. It will.
Right. And it really comes down to the way we market it and the way Apple markets it. Because we're not going to teach the average person what a public key, private key pair is. Like you don't need to know that it works. Like I showed you the demo earlier, and I was one click biometrics, and I'm in. And it just felt like magic. So that's the thing we have to sell.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, Andrew, Mark, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
It was a great discussion. Again, there'll be a blog linked in the description. And I wanted to end with, I guess, a thought, which is, part of my job and a team that supports me in that is to look at trends, what's going to hit, what's not going to hit, where to invest, where not to invest. And a lot of that comes down to the engineering discipline and rigor behind something. Right, which is a really important aspect to it, and the other part is the user experience part of that, how it improves upon the user experience. So some things I say no, I'm not believing the hype cycle, and some things I'm like, okay, I don't see why this wouldn't happen, and this fits in that camp rather squarely. It's strong technology, it's backwards compatible to all the standards, all the major cloud vendors are in. It improves the user experience, it improves security. I don't see a downside to this. The only thing I see as a risk moving forward is the hype cycle hasn't hit this yet. Like Apple had a big launch on it and a big push. You don't hear. I don't think that we're getting the press on this that we should be getting.
Most people don't know they exist yet.
Right.
Correct. Death of the password is a huge deal. So maybe I'm hoping that this gains that steam and momentum, and I think that's going to be led by the early adopters. Who get out there and do it first.
Yeah, I think the hard part is like early adopters means a couple different things, right? It's brands and companies as well as end users. I think it'll be interesting to see, Andrew mentioned before, Google just 2 weeks ago came out, finally certified their standard around how they're doing this. I think, is Microsoft's out yet?
So I don't know actually, but the APIs that matter are really iOS and Android and the web.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the last point. Start with mobile.
Yeah, start with mobile.
Oh, absolutely. But the reason I mention it is because we have Google I/O coming up. We have Worldwide Developer Conference this year. So it'll be interesting to see how much press comes out of this, because last year, as we keep talking about, Apple kind of led the way with last June by announcing this, and then has been some kind of steam in the tech press coming into the fall, now coming in. But now with the big conferences coming out, we can imagine an additional push. So I'm hoping that the hype cycle is actually coming.
Great. Yeah. Well, again, thank you both for joining. Great discussion. And if you guys want to learn more, there's some earlier on Mark referenced some sites to go check out. Obviously, the blog I've mentioned a couple times, and play with it yourself. There's going to be a technical blog coming out as well that will kind of walk you through how to do some of this in your own organizations. Just start playing with it. It's not a huge technical lift, but there's a ton of value. Thanks again for listening to our podcast, and we'll be back with another episode pretty soon.